Dear Sir, I'm most concerned about the destruction of tropical forests all over the world.
And I would like to know what steps you're taking to phase out tropical timber from your store.
And when I buy something from you, like a window frame or a new door, I would like to know where the wood comes
Can you
from.
tell me, for example, how many of the things you're selling today come from tropical forests?
Consumers everywhere are becoming more and more aware about the products they buy. It's an issue that's being taken very seriously by retail stores like the British Do-It-All chain.
A lot of customers are beginning to ask questions, and I think we owe it to ourselves and also to our customers to ensure that we source our timber from well-managed sources. I think we have got to the point where we all have to contribute our little bit to the environment.
Many timber products now claim to be environmentally friendly. But what do such claims actually mean? Today's logging methods originated in the days when forest resources were apparently unlimited, with little or no thought given to the damage caused.
Although in many countries the forestry industry has increased in production in recent years, individuals have been replaced by large felling machines. And it's also changed in that it's become much more global in its reach. And you'll find one company based, say, in Europe working in many different continents, American companies stretching out all over the world. We're faced with seeing complete loss or almost complete loss of primary and old-growth forests in some countries over the next 10 or 20 years.
Many forests have been denuded completely, even in developed countries like Canada. For this is just as much a temperate forest problem. The crisis is worldwide. Forests are being destroyed wherever they occur as the Earth's natural vegetation, and the environmental implications are immense. Thailand is one country that's paying a heavy price for the almost total destruction of its natural forests. 5 years ago, floods poured down from denuded hills, devastating 2 southern provinces, destroying whole villages and killing nearly 1,000 people. A vast area was inundated for weeks. In other places, deforestation has resulted in droughts and famine. 5 years ago, this was a state-reserved forest. Now it's classified as degraded forest land, typical of areas cleared for agriculture, road building, or by the timber industry. One effect of forest loss has been to increase the price of hardwood products, like the solid teak doors that are so popular throughout Thailand.
Has the price made any difference, or are you selling the same amount as before?
We sell more because people think wood is getting less, so people are trying to keep it.
Now, you're still able to get teak today. Where does it come from?
Mainly from northern part of Thailand. And of course some from Burma too, but we don't know how they get in.
In fact, little or no teak these days actually originates in Thailand. Much of it comes in from Burma. The timber trucks travel mostly at night, since much of the trade is now illegal. These sawmills are on the Burmese side of the Salween River. Having denuded their own country, Thai companies are now engaged in the destruction of other people's forests in Burma, Laos and Cambodia. A raid by armed police on an illegal logging operation in eastern Thailand. With so little standing forest left, there's now a complete ban on logging throughout the country, and at least some infringements of the law are now controlled and the raids publicised. But then, most Thai companies now cut their timber in surrounding countries, where they can operate free of almost any constraints, legal or environmental. And so long as individual logs can't be traced, there's very little hope in controlling any aspect of the international trade in illegal timber. The destruction of easily accessible forests has led the international logging companies further and further afield, and some of the forests now under threat are among the most valuable and important still standing. This is Vela La Vela, one of the Solomon Islands in the Western Pacific, where many of the plants and animals are endemics. In other words, they occur nowhere else in the world. A few of these thousands of unique species have been celebrated on successive issues of stamps. Unfortunately, this official recognition hasn't stopped the forests being destroyed, with or without the permission of the rightful owners. One local landowner here is Teddy Hitokera, who woke up one morning to find his trees being flattened by the Korean Hyundai Corporation.
The company came and started digging and damaging the whole place. All my family were crying because they'd spoiled our property, all my fields, fruit trees and coconut trees. They destroyed everything and they spoiled the place where I had my garden.
For every tree that Hyundai have taken, 10 others have been needlessly destroyed. Government rules forbid the felling of trees within 50 metres of rivers to limit ecological damage and erosion. But with no system of inspection, few regulations can be enforced.
I'm sorry about what's happened to the water in the river. It's dirty now. We can't drink it. So my family suffers. We all suffer. Everything is spoiled now, so it disturbs me. We're worried and sorry. Our life here has been spoiled. It's no good living here now.
There are no longer fish in these streams, and the earth has been compacted and waterlogged, natural regeneration of the forest disrupted. It is in these remote areas where the logging companies have a completely free rein that some of the worst damage is being done. And there are other consequences. After clear felling like this, epidemics of waterborne diseases like malaria are often a serious threat to the indigenous peoples whose land has been plundered.
Well, the present situation is that sometimes they get compensation, usually they get ignored, and then the logging goes ahead without consideration of their welfare or livelihoods, and they suffer very badly. Now, what should happen is that their prior rights to those lands should be recognised. Therefore, any negotiations to extract timber on those lands should be done with them and should only go ahead according to schemes which suit them, which have their consent.
In many places, this is perhaps a forlorn hope. The complete lack of effective supervision in many areas means that much of the tropical timber industry operates totally outside the law, whichever country it's working in. A recent report by the International Traffic Network highlighted law-breaking, illegal logging and timber smuggling on a massive scale, involving timber worth billions of dollars annually. In the Philippines, over 400 illegal sawmills have been closed down in recent years, but the trade is so lucrative that millions of tons are still smuggled out every year, costing the government about $5 million a day in lost tax revenues. With so many problems involved in its production, should we be buying these tropical timber products at all? A total ban is unrealistic, but perhaps international pressure could be used to guarantee some sort of future for the world's forests.
Most forest management today is not good forest management, unfortunately. We run the full gamut from mining or clear felling of virgin primary forests to very intensively managed plantations, of which we have many examples in Europe, which are very poor in terms of wildlife and other functions that we expect from forests. So there are very many examples of badly managed forests, unfortunately. We're starting from the assumption that certain forests can be managed properly, assuming that there is the technical knowledge and the goodwill to do so. And we are trying to use the purchasing power of the consumer, if you like, the so-called green consumer, who we've heard so much about in recent times, to encourage this forest management.
200 miles north of Stockholm, the latest technology is being used to harvest some of the world's oldest productive forests and plantations. The Stora Corporation, one of the biggest timber companies in Europe, has produced timber here on its own land for nearly 700 years. And with increasingly sophisticated management systems, they're now experimenting with new ways to run a profitable timber business and take ecological principles fully into account.
Our principles and goals are to ecologically restore our forest holdings, which have been used for forestry for such a very long time, so biodiversity is reduced. And one of the principles is to mimic the natural disturbance regimes here, which is forest fires. And this means, for example, to leave behind certain habitats, mainly wet habitats, and also groups and scattered trees on the clear-cut areas. Before we almost cut down every tree on a cutting area, but now we leave between 5 and 10% of the trees behind, dependent on what type of forest we are working in. We have reduced the clear felling area size, yes, but in a way, ecologists mean today that it's not the size per se which is important. We also need some big clear-cut areas producing big forest blocks in the long run. So the big thing is to create a good variation of cut sizes.
This policy sounds good, but does it filter down to the man with a chainsaw or driving the automated forest harvester?
Ja, vi försöker ju här att spara då. Well, nowadays we try to leave anything useful standing, anything that's not too valuable for actual production. Green trees and dead trees, for birds and for insects. And we also leave trees around bits of wetland and places like that. Where have you learned all this? We all attended a course about 7 or 8 years ago. Altogether, 40 hours of study, I think it was.
And how do you like it now?
Well, I think it's very good, actually. It's much better to do something that helps the environment rather than clearing the whole forest or destroying it completely.
We have some remnants of natural forest. There are very few in this part of the country. We have made some examples just showing that natural or key habitats, as we prefer to call them today, only covers about 1 or 2% of the productive forest land. And of course these areas are extremely important if we are going to restore biodiversity over the area as a whole. So the policy is to identify these areas, handle them properly, which very often is not to handle them at all, and to find a strategy to make the species living in them able to expand out in our managed forest landscape again.
You might expect that with this sort of far-sighted policy, the Stora Corporation is growing a high-value crop, but in fact much of their timber goes to make wood chips and wood pulp, very much products at the low-value end of the market. And yet their sophisticated ecological management must cost money that most big companies are still unwilling to spend.
We have estimated the total cost for these environmental consideration to something like 10% of the profit of Stora Forest, of the forestry. So in the short run, it costs us about 10% of our net profit. In the long run, we think it will give us more back. Today, and especially tomorrow, products become more and more linked to the processes under which they are produced. And our customers and their customers will demand that our products are produced under environmentally sound conditions. And therefore, we believe this is commercially sound.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
New systems of forest management are also proving to be good business in Wales, where for many years native woodlands were almost totally neglected until the setting up of a new agency called Coed Cymru, Wales Wood.
When Coed Cymru was launched in 1985, something like 80% of all of the native woodlands in Wales showed no significant evidence of regeneration. In other words, they were dying on their feet. That situation is changing today and changing rapidly. But I think it should be remembered that it was driven initially by concern from people whose primary interest was the conservation of these woodlands and of the plants and animals that thrived in them.
By the time it's been thinned, it's actually in a better condition than it would have been had it been left to its own devices. You get a greater variety of insects, birds, animals living in the wood because you've got the wood in various stages. If you've just got a mono-age wood, well then you tend to get a very limited variety of wildlife because you've only got the one habitat.
This is a gap that occurred in this wood when we felled a tree about 10 years ago. And in the place of the tree that's felled, in the gap left in the canopy, we have got oak growing, birch growing, and hawthorn growing. These will go on to compete with another to form a crop. Eventually we will end up with a wood dominated by oak, but also a wood that has trees of every age from 1 until 150.
Several local manufacturers have now switched entirely to locally grown oak and birch for their raw material, and some of the furniture now being produced is of an extremely high quality. Their customers are already impressed, and Coed Cymru would welcome the chance to prove their standards of woodland management too.
The consumers need to have a guarantee that the wood products they're buying, whether it be a table, a chair or a plank of wood, actually comes from a well-managed forest. So we need some kind of reliable labelling scheme which will follow the timber all the way from the well-managed forest to the consumer.
The idea is to give individual logs an identity which we can track as they move from the forest down to the sawmill and then off to manufacture. Because unless we can establish an audit trail, unless we can establish a link from the forest to the furniture, then we can never prove the validity of an eco-label. This is a modern handheld computer and laser scanner. It's the sort of tool we use for recording details about the tree. The moment it's cut down and is moved to a point where it can be accessed, then it'll be labelled and measured and the species recorded and the condition of the log recorded. And at that point, only logs with tags on, with the official tag on, will be able to be moved. It's a license to move. It's evidence of legal extraction of timber.
So logs that don't have this label?
They'll be illegal. And what is more, it'll provide an incentive for people to keep the tag on. So if you've paid for the tag and you've applied it to your tree, then you'll want it to stay on right the way down the line.
So this is where the FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council, an international voluntary body, comes into the picture. The FSC will have the responsibility of approving and accrediting the certifying agencies based in different countries. Each agency will then in turn monitor and approve the individual timber producers, who will be permitted to label their products with an approved symbol, allowing the consumers to buy the products knowing they come from well-managed sources, and that the label itself is trustworthy. Products that come from other sources will not qualify for one of the internationally approved labels.
We are seeking through a fairly broad process of consultation to establish 10 basic principles of good forest management, which are relatively simple in fact, and then to oversee and evaluate the existing certification schemes to make sure they're actually using these standards in an independent and reliable way, and they're not being fooled into saying that such a forest is being well managed when it isn't, or bribed or whatever. I mean, all of these things can unfortunately occur.
One of the first groups of people who could benefit from the new scheme are villagers in parts of Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands who've learnt to operate what's known as a walkabout sawmill. This is appropriate technology for use on land that's owned by the whole community, and it's already allowing villagers in remote areas to add enormously to the value of their raw timber without damaging the forest as a whole.
These walkabout sawmills are very good because you take the walkabout sawmill in pieces right into the jungle. You find a tree that you think you could cut down, and then you cut it down and you cut it into timber, and then you can take it out from there without much destruction of the forest. This, to me, is a much better way to protect the environment. At the same time, you can get the maximum benefit financially from that tree that you cut down. And when I say you get the maximum benefit, I'm talking about the people who own the forest, and these are the local people.
At At Sawara village on the north coast of New Guinea, the forest is rich in rosewood and other valuable timber trees. The team operates the sawmill within a mile of the village, but they're well aware of the need to manage the forest carefully if timber production is to be sustainable.
David at 26.
At the same time, we cut him DY put on.
When we cut down a tree, we don't cut another one to damage the same area. So when one tree comes down, we want to give the young trees a chance to grow up, so we go further away and cut our next tree over there.
There are a number of schemes where local people have full control. And I think the most encouraging examples are not just where they have a say in what happens, but where they're actually doing the logging themselves. And in those circumstances, of course, they are absolutely able to make sure that their needs are balanced with the needs of the environment and the long-term management of forests. Some schemes in Mexico and many in Southeast Asia, where people have control of the forests, and not only are the forests regenerating and maintaining themselves, they're actually increasing. So you've actually got reforestation under Indigenous management.
Timber that is now being produced by some of the Walkabout teams is already finding an international market, earning hard currency. It's being shipped to Britain for the Ecological Trading Company, who finish some of their timber here at their sawmill in Norfolk. The final product is sold in a number of high street stores, as well as to some special customers further afield.
The timber that you was looking at today, which you was watching us cut, is in fact going to the New York office of Hines. That's for flooring, skirting boards, doors and the like. Masons is another very big customer which supplies B&Q for their mouldings for the DIY trade, i.e. planed all round skirtings. I think it's got to grow. We've got to encourage people to use sustainable timbers as opposed to conventional sources, which is doing the world no good whatsoever, and certainly not doing the local communities any good.
Since the Forest Stewardship Council is a consumer-led and by definition therefore sort of voluntary initiative, and it will depend on the goodwill of consumers to buy or not to buy certain kinds of timber, in and of itself it's not going to be sufficient to completely change forest practices, for example, clear felling of primary forests. Other initiatives will be necessary, changes in government policy, other forms of action by environmental groups. But certainly it's part of the puzzle, and I think a very important part, because what we're really lacking today are some positive initiatives people can take. To buy some timber from a well-managed forest is something positive the consumer can do. There are all sorts of negative things that they can do as well, which are sometimes necessary. But I think people are more and more looking for something positive to do for the environment.
I think what we are going to benefit out of the system is the opportunity to say to our customers that we are actually a company who take environmental issues very seriously, and we are demonstrating our efforts as far as timber sourcing is concerned.
With the degradation and misuse of the world's forests now such an urgent issue, there are increasing pressures to find a new approach. The Forest Stewardship Council's timber labelling scheme could be the new initiative that starts to give the world's forests a real future.
We hope it'll be accepted worldwide. We hope that it'll be accepted by producers in both tropical and temperate countries, by governments, by the industry, by people who buy and sell timber, and ultimately by the consumer. The consumer will have a real choice and will no longer be able to say, I don't know where this comes from.